I'm Ginny Robinson. I'm a modern quilter and quilt designer, and today I'm going to talk about modern memory quilts. So this quilt is inspired by my cousin Emma, who graduated from high school recently. Her mom approached me to make a memory quilt, a celebration quilt, for her high school graduation, and I was happy to do it. It's always an honor to make that kind of quilt. She handed me a huge garbage bag of clothes that had been Emma's from the time that she was born all the way through high school, including cheerleading uniforms with glitter on them. Making a cohesive quilt out of that much stuff was really overwhelming for me. So I thought about how I could design a quilt that was modern and bright and reflected Emma's personality, and I decided on something like this. I basically take quilting cotton. I know how quilting cotton's gonna work. It's easy to piece, it's easy to work with, and I let that create the color scheme for the quilt or the quilt block. So today what we're going to do is use raw edge applique to complete this block using some of this clothing. So I'm going to choose this adorable, tiny little shirt, and what I'm going to do is just cut out a piece bigger than I know I need. For this, I'm pretty much going to avoid buttons, extra seams, thick seams, things like that. It just makes it easier to work with. If you want to get fancy at some point, you can. You can include little pockets, things like that. But today I'm just going to make it easy on myself. Sharp scissors always help with different kinds of fabric. So the next thing I'm going to do is use fusible interfacing. And one of the things you'll notice when you're working with this is one piece of paper comes off much more easily than the other side. That's the side you want to take off first. And then just going to place it just like this. Come over, just give it a quick press with the iron. And it does not have to be perfect at this point. Again. And then I'm just going to draw a freehand heart. It is okay with me if not all of my hearts look the same, but if you want to use a template, you certainly can. Again, a nice sharp pair of scissors really helps here. Take your time cutting it out. Using applique shapes for memory quilts is really helpful because so often you don't have quite enough fabric to make nice size quilt squares. Applique gives you a lot of freedom. It's great for small clothes. Okay, the next step is to peel off the backing, and this can be a little bit tricky. The glue on fusible interfacing is often pretty strong, so don't be surprised if it feels like it's going to stick forever. It won't. There we go. Then we're just going to place it on our quilt block where we want it. As you can see here for this quilt block, I've chosen blue hearts for the blue section, hearts that have some kind of pink or red for the red section, and then golds and yellows for the yellow section. Here's a place where I have added a pocket just for a little extra bit of detail because it's cute, and it's made out of gold lame knit baby pants, which would be required for you to include. So now you're going to come back, hit it with iron one more time. That's going to fuse it to your background fabric. And then you're going to take it over to the sewing machine. So for this, I'm just going to use quilting piecing thread, nothing fancy. A nice straight stitch with a short stitch length is probably what you're going to want to use. And because it's fused so nicely, you don't really have to worry about it shifting under your foot. At a curve, it's really nice just to go really slow. For this kind of applique, sometimes I'll use a monofilament, but often I just match the applique shape. Gonna lift your presser foot on a curve. Keep going. There we go. It's nice to have your machine set so that when you stop sewing, the needle is down. It just helps pivot underneath the presser foot. Just again, take your time. Just create a nice stitch. Okay, last turn here. Get the little tail thread out of the way. So there we go. All right, cut your thread. Let's snip that, clean it up a little bit. Normally I would close that, but like I said, when you use a fusible applique, your shape's gonna stay down no matter what. So if you're missing a couple of stitches, it's all right. One of the things you'll notice when you're making memory quilts is that often the material that you get is not quilting cotton. It's not anything even close to quilting cotton. Even here for this plaid heart, this cotton was much, much thinner than the cotton that we normally would use when we're making quilts out of plain old quilter's cotton. So as you can see here, I've got lots of hearts that are made out of plenty of different materials. This comes from a knit onesie. We've got pajamas here. This was actually part of a skirt that had fringe on it, and I obviously cut off the fringe. I've got sweatpants here, which is thick, but again, with the fusible interfacing, it's gonna work just fine. You might find that you've got a little bit of a thicker edge around the shape that you cut, but because you're sewing it down, it's actually not a problem at all. It's an area that you might need to be careful with when you go to quilt it, because that area is a little bit thicker, but for the most part, you can sandwich this quilt top if you were making a mini. If you wanted to include other blocks with, different color stripes for different colored clothing, you could do that. But for the most part, you can just sandwich this up and quilt it any way that you like. If you have a detail like a pocket, you are going to want to make sure that you quilt around that, because the fun part of including a pocket is the fact that it still acts like a pocket even in the finished quilt. Speaking of the finished quilt, one of my favorite things about giving Emma her quilt when I was finished with it was realizing that even though I had cut her clothing from 18 years of life into these really small oval shapes, she still recognized every single bit of clothing in that quilt. She smiled, she saw camp, she saw high school, she saw her childhood. It worked out perfectly.